Well, you got 50 this way, and you got and another 34, so it's 84 from 100. It's the 16th percentile. Based on the z-score, we can determine the exact percentile, but you got a whole chart for every number, every fractional number that's represented there. You see the value in z-scores? You could actually take a student's z-score and tell a parent how they relate to the group. If you got the raw score, you don't really know. Now, if you got the average, you know a little something. But a raw score doesn't tell you a lot. The z-score helps you give some kind of value to it.
Is that what's used on EOGs to tell percentiles?
Mm-hmm.
Well, on EOG, we get scale scores and z-scores sometimes. Z-score standardizes a little better. A scale score takes into consideration the difficulty of questions. So if you got 100 questions on the test, and the first question might be weighted at 0. The second question might be rated at 1. The third question might be rated at 1.5. There's some level of difficulty. So if I got this question right and missed this one, got this one right, and you took the test, you got this one right and this one right and missed this one, who's got the highest scale score? You have, because you got the weighted question right. Scale score balances, should give you a better indication of comparative knowledge based on the difficulty of the question.
So when
So
they
you
get
get those, but you also might get a z-score too.
so they get percentiles and then a scale score. So the percentile, would it still take in the weighted part of the question? Or would it just strictly be in comparison to the group?
No, the z-score just takes in, the z-score does not take the scale score, it takes the raw score. Because you're actually averaging the raw score. I guess you could z-score the scale scores if you want to. What is the average z-score in any group is always what?
0.
If you took 100 z-scores and added them up and divided by 100, what are you going to get?
0.
0. The average is always 0. If you got 1,000, it's still 0 because that's what the relationship of the z is. Now, there's another, that's a standard score. There's another standard score, it's called a T. T is equal 10 times z plus 50. So what is the t-score for 90? Ten times 0.5 plus 50 equals
55.
55. So t-score for 85.
$50.
50. So what's going to be your average t-score in any set of t-scores?
50.
So in the t-scores, you're looking at where I'm above or below 50. In z-scores, I'm looking at where I'm above or below. What t-scores do, there are no negative scores in t-scores because it's always adding that 50 to it. It's just another standard score. You could get scores reported in t's rather than z's. Now you know what they are.
So, tell me if I'm understanding this right. Like 9 or 10 years ago when we were on EOGs, a kid could pass by if they made a level 2 or whatever by 2 standard deviations. Technically, they were in the 2nd percentile and still passing. Is that right?
It gets a little more, yeah, but it's a little more complicated because the first year we ever did testing, you got a spread of scores with a standard deviation. The next year you put those scores in with those scores, so the standard deviation should get smaller. Then the next year you got more scores. Eventually you get millions of scores thrown in, so the standard deviation gets smaller and smaller. So each year the standard deviation changes based on how this group did that year. So me getting credit for the course, it depends on how everybody else in the state did. If everybody else in the state did real poorly, it helps me get closer to that 2nd deviation point. everybody in the state did real good, it's more difficult for me to get to that point. But
Our
yes,
testing coordinator always told us that the two SES were due to field test questions.
there were what?
They were due to field test questions, that it was unfair if a child was, if they failed based on missing a field test question. That's how it was explained to us.
I didn't think those counted anyways.
They're not supposed to.
From the
Like when he said it would be
manual, it says-
weighted, a field test would be a weight of 0, whether they passed it or
I
not.
thought, a field test just looks at the validity of the item itself to see if it measures what they want it to measure and does it give you a read back. I didn't know that field tests would ever be used in the calculation.
The manual,
until
it
was
says some will
accepted as
count and some will
It
not
says some
count.
will count and some
I've
won't.
But
just
it
read
says
those drug
field tests.
tests.
Now, the misleading part on that is that each subject has its own formula, so an EOG in reading, it's a long formula, I don't even understand it. It is the raw score or the scale score, which we want to use, plus
Proficiency.
2 standard deviation units, plus each discipline has its own index, plus a .98, plus some other stuff. But somehow in their wisdom of difficulty of items, the math has a different index than the social studies, and social studies is different from English. But it is based on a long-term calculation of numbers that is the appropriate index, which means each subject area has its own weight based on prior experience with prior performance on the test itself. It might be, instead of .98, it might be 1.66 is the index. The point of all that is, fair or unfair, our receiving credit or reaching grade level or scoring where we need to score is so dependent upon what everybody does. As an individual student, you hope the state does poorly because it's built into the formula.
Is that why it's harder to make a 3 now than it used to be? Because a 3 used to be like 37 percentile and above, and now they've upped it to like.
No, that's from renorming. They renorming the standards, so they decided that there needs to be a point added, or you might go to a 2.2 standard deviation rather than a 2. They renorm it based on, if for a couple years in a row everybody did real good, then they say, well, it's too easy, we need to up it. That's right. One year you could be a level 3 and the next year it might be a high level 2. Or vice versa.
That happened to one of my students. They made a 3 last year, a 2 this year, but they actually grew in points. Like skill score grew, but they made a level 2.
So that meant the state did better. Everybody in the state did better, or it was renormed to what people did better.
It always bothered me as a classroom teacher that a child could be proficient but not show growth for this school year. Do you know what I mean? As far as looking at the zone of proximal development and looking at the scale score, it really bothered me.
That means everybody in the state did a little worse.
So is that why our testing coordinator says that we really shouldn't look at 1 year from that score to the next score because of the standard deviation and how it changes?
Yeah.
But we're always
But
so
it's
quick
how-
to be
but
like,
it's
you
how we
grew
determine growth.
14 points.
Yeah, I know that's
But
what
they say there's a
always
different
makes me
growth
laugh.
formula.
Huh.
Our testing coordinator says that we can't
Well,
like if they,
you can't tell a kid how many questions to get right to make growth because you don't know.
Yeah,
It
we don't
all
have the
depends on
growth.
what everybody else does.
Well, the state previously gave us a recommendation in 3rd grade in reading, they should make 7 points growth to show a year's worth of growth. And then that changes for other grade levels.
You won't be dealing with this in research. You'll deal with the standard deviation, and you might get some Z-scores if you wanted to look at percent of measures above or below a certain area and that kind of thing. But that's just to give you an idea of what those are. You're going to deal with standard deviation and central tendency.
Are you gonna hold our hand through the process of going from a survey to?
Actually, I'm not supposed to be teaching you this because this is master level research and you're supposed to already know this.
I didn't go to Gardner Webb for my master's.
Well, some schools will give you this, a test on this, and if you don't pass this, you don't get in, but if everybody I've ever worked with needs a refresher on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll hold hands through.
Same.
That makes me feel so much better.
Well, you don't have to know all this, you just gotta push the right button now and know what it means when it finishes. That's the reason I want you, like to show it to you, and tomorrow morning, we're actually gonna do some math. If you don't have a calculator on your computer, you might need one. And we don't need to do that, other than to see how all of it comes together. I think when you say, well, now if somebody says, if they ask you to say something about standard deviation, you picture this already, and what it means, as opposed to popping up on the screen. Where'd that come from? What is it? What does that really mean? Now you know what it really means.
Well, it's making the articles that we're reading when they talk about all their analysis, it's making it make a little more sense. Because they put all this stuff in parentheses and, you know, all that in the articles.
Yeah, because the R values, if an R value of 0.6, what does that tell you? That's a correlation. That means a relationship between two variables. It only goes from -1 to +1. No smaller than that, no larger than that. Anything from 0 to 0.35 is a weak correlation. Anything from 0.35 to 0.75 is a moderate correlation, which is greater than 0.75. It's a strong correlation. So if you read an article, they won't tell you if that's moderate, weak, or strong, but you know it's what? It's a middle of the road moderate correlation. If you square R and multiply it times 100, if you notice that lady today was talking about what percentage it would add to, if you square the correlation and multiply it times 100, so 6 times 6 is 36 times 100, that's the percent of difference that you can account for. So if the correlation between these scores and these scores is 0.6, and you can say that 1 out of every 3 scores can be attributed to something. So the higher the correlation, you go to 9, you now got 81% that you can account for. If you're down to 3, you only got 9% that you can account for. So this is more important, is as important probably as the R value, but R tells you something. We got to go one more step with that, and we'll probably get to that in the morning. You want to know whether or not that coefficient, and it's not just 0.6, it might be something like that, 4 digits. You want to know if that's significant or not, meaning, is there a reason for that difference that can be within a guess of at least, I said this to you last time, an 0.5 level of probability means you got a 95% chance of being right when you say that the R value between here and there is significant, meaning you got a 95% chance of being right that something happened to cause that and it wasn't just luck. But we'll talk about that in the morning and revisit that, because that has to do with hypotheses and hypotheses testing. A hypothesis says there is a change or is not a change, and the not a change is called a null. You got to reject the null before you can set the hypothesis. You can't reject the null unless you got significant differences. So if the correlational value is not significant, you must accept the null. If the correlation value is significant, then you can reject the null.
About like the dissertation today, are we gonna find out about those so we can attend, or?
Find out about what?
The
Like the
dissertation
dissertation-
defense.
Yeah. Like for future ones, are we gonna,
Yeah,
No.
when we're gonna have them.
yeah,
Yeah,
so we
we
can.
got one next week. It's down on the board. Dustin Bridges over from Crest Middle
Yeah.
is defending his Tuesday, I think, at 1 o'clock. Yeah, and they're coming now. I mean, this is the first year of when we had 65 people come in the program as opposed to 20. We got 17 people gonna graduate in August. We never had more than 4 or 5 at the most.
Wow.
So you'll let us know. when those-
17 out of 65.
No, just 17 at this particular time. Out of the 65, I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to go back.
To the T spot.